Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Track of the Week on Lap of the World. Last Friday we virtually revisited and learned about the lowest altitude track in the world at 133 feet below sea level, California's desert gem, the Thermal Club. This week we travel from the hot, arid valleys of Southern California to somewhere a bit cooler. We are headed up in altitude but more significantly up in latitude. Quite significantly. To the northernmost permanent racing circuit in the world, Norway's Arctic Circle Raceway. My lovely wife, who lived briefly in Alaska and graduated from a Norwegian high school, likes to tease that people in Tennessee will call anything above about the 39th parallel, quote-unquote, the North. And that may be generally accurate, but in this case I am not just being a hyperbolic southerner. As its name implies, Arctic Circle Raceway is, well, strictly speaking, it is in fact about 10 miles south of the Arctic Circle proper, but that's close enough that in midsummer they can host a 24-hour race driven entirely in daylight. Located in the Dunderland Valley just northeast of the city of Mo i Rana, Arctic Circle Raceway, or ACR as I'll call it for brevity, is, outside of one neighbor in Norway, far and away the northernmost permanent paved driving facility in the world. Nothing else even really gets close outside of some military training facilities and cold weather proving grounds next door in Sweden. Speaking of cold weather, I quipped in the intro about our destination this week being a bit cooler than Palm Desert. Well, with some pun intended, Mo i Rana, Norway is nearly the polar opposite of thermal California, being notably cold and wet. The average winter low in that part of the Golden State was 50 degrees F. Meanwhile, the average summer high at Arctic Circle Raceway is typically below 60 F, with midwinter lows approaching negative 20 F. Before you ask, no, it isn't also the coldest track in the world. This part of Norway actually benefits from some coastal effects that keep things somewhere this side of the contents of a witch's brass bra. Mo i Rana also receives more than 57 inches of precipitation annually compared to the 3-inch annual average in thermal, much of that nearly 5 feet of water coming in the form of snow between October and April. Arctic Circle Raceway's history is interesting and goes all the way back to 1905, sort of. Norway as a country actually came somewhat late to the racetrack building party, in large part due to lack of any domestic automotive industry. Although ice racing and presumably rally has been a thing since the 50s or even before, Norway didn't get its first permanent hard surface circuit until the early 70s. Compare that to Australia, Great Britain, and the US, with permanent circuits dating back to before 1910. The local motorsports club in the Mo i Rana region finally laid down a gravel circuit in 1972, and then later paved that circuit. The 1.2 kilometer or 3/4 mile Rosvoll Motorstadion held its first tarmac events in the summer of 1975 and is Norway's first proper racing circuit. I say is because it still exists as part of a rallycross arena, and until Arctic Circle Raceway opened, it held the title for northernmost paved circuit in the world. Rosvoll is relevant here because 10 or so years after that circuit opened, plans were proposed to lengthen it, but this was eventually proven infeasible for one reason or another. The local motorsport club then turned its attention to finding a place for a new circuit and raising the money to build it. The site they eventually chose sits just 6 miles north of Rosvoll, but allowed for the planning of a much longer circuit with minimal impact to the surrounding environment. Indeed, only 10% of the ACR facility sits on previously undisturbed ground, and the remaining 90% is indisputably an improvement. The Dunderland Valley in decades past was home to a large iron ore mine. Its namesake, the Dunderland Iron Ore Company, was established in 1905 and counted, entertainingly, one Thomas Edison among its owners. Mining is a messy business, and after the site was abandoned, had no other use, except that since nearly the turn of the century they had been piling up an almost ideal foundation for a racetrack. The majority of Arctic Circle Raceway then sits atop the spoil accrued from decades of ore extraction, repurposing that displaced overburden as grade fill with nearly ideal compaction and drainage. This upcycling ethos was carried throughout the raceway's plans, with all the electricity to run the track coming from hydropower, something I can appreciate myself living in a region that depends heavily on water and gravity to keep the lights on. Even today, ACR maintains a commitment to sustainability and minimal environmental impact while still being able to enjoy motorsports in the region. Rewinding a bit, it took half a decade of raising funds and negotiating government contributions for the local club to pull together the 1990 equivalent of about $12 million in today's money, which allowed planning and construction to begin in earnest. Built entirely by local Norwegian contractors, much of the success of the project, I'm told, is a tribute to the enthusiasm of the local motorsports community, as well as the general public in the region. Local businesses, neighboring municipalities, and thousands of volunteers contributed to the eventual opening of Arctic Circle Raceway in 1995. The results of these efforts is something I desperately want to see for myself one day. The pride of the region, a 2.3-mile ribbon of asphalt dropped in the midst of some of the most dramatic natural scenery on Earth. Currently the longest track in Norway in addition to the northernmost, ACR boasts 12 turns, 100 feet of elevation change, and is regarded by many as one of the best tracks in Scandinavia. Both car and bike friendly, a lap of the raceway involves stringing together high-speed S's, both climbing and falling turns, and challenging hairpins while coming to literal grip with a special blend of asphalt. The secret sauce tarmac purportedly provides some of the best wet traction anywhere, a side effect of its true design intent, holding up to the long harsh winters in part by facilitating better drainage for both rainwater and snowmelt to minimize freeze-thaw damage to the surface. The friendly side effect is that it makes the track more safely usable in the wet, although possibly harder on tires in the dry. Circling back to weather, as you might imagine, the traditional driving season is fairly short at this latitude, with just a couple of months of optimal weather. ACR does host some winter recreation as well, while that special tarmac is buried under a few feet of the white frozen stuff. However, if you want to visit and properly drive Arctic Circle Raceway, and I know I do have some tips from local sources. First, shoot for June, July, or August unless you like skiing more than driving. Second, I've been eyeballing the Atlantic Coast Highway for some epic while you're there scenery. And for the track driving, check out killsbugsfast.no. They host an annual festival-style event at ACR. In 2021, it's tentatively scheduled for August, with the probably obvious COVID caveat for now. Speaking of Kills Bugs Fast, thanks to Frode from that organization for the summer season drone and driving footage you've watched. Thanks as well to Øystein from Arctic Circle Raceway for much of the historical information and some of the images, as well as to Sjursen Design for the winter season drone footage. I've left links in the description to each of their respective organizations. I'll leave you with a contiguous lap of Arctic Circle Raceway from the side of a Lamborghini Huracan, while I thank you for watching, ask for your subscription, and remind you that I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and I will see you in the next video, if not at the track.